Neither side is going to get enough of an upper hand to actually change policy.
Allowing businesses to prosper and trade is how the country recognizes prosperity.
You're speaking in favor of liberty. We don't like that. We're going to shut you out.
Welcome back to the Aussie Wire's continuing coverage of the Students for Liberty Summit and Conference here in Washington, D.C. I have the pleasure of enjoying some brilliant winter weather whilst my former home city of Melbourne is sweltering through some 40 degrees, or at least were back on the weekend. We've got more great interviews coming up for you right now. Bryan Caplan, thank you so much for saying hi and chatting to us here at the Aussie Wire. One of the things I love about places like Students for Liberty is it brings together amazing minds. I heard you speaking, you're an economist. For those that don't know you, could you just briefly sort of tell us your bio, I guess? But then I heard you talking a very passionate defense of immigration and how it's actually a really good thing. Now, this is a massive argument that's blown up in Australia, and I'd love for you to share with us the reasons why you believe that immigration is a good thing.
So I'm Bryan Caplan. I'm a professor of economics at George Mason University, and I'm a New York Times bestselling author. I would say that I'm surprised that Australia would be having such a debate because it is more than the United States a country of immigrants. It is one where you've gotten your foreign-born share up to a much higher level than in the United States, where people often talk as if we're at a breaking point, and yet we look at Australia and it seems like this is absolutely crucial for all of the growth that Australia's had in recent years.
Well, that's one of the criticisms. I'd like to sort of pick up on that, because one of the criticisms is the growth is only because of population growth. The GDP per capita, the productivity per capita hasn't improved. So they argue that it looks like growth, but in reality they say, well, are we better off?
Yes. The main thing to understand is that immigrants make money by producing things that other people want. So if you are the customer of an immigrant, that is a person that is making your money worthwhile. Now, if they're producing things that are exported to the rest of the world, you might say maybe it's just car consumers over the United States that are benefiting. But here's the interesting thing about modern economies. That 80% of the economy is services. That means products that by definition can only be sold in Australia to Australians or maybe to a few tourists. So when immigrants that work in anything other that work in services are selling products to people that are there. Like, when you just think about a new restaurant opens up, it's an Afghan restaurant. All right, what does that mean? It means that the money in your pocket is now worth more because there is one more place you can spend it, and that is the point of money, is to actually spend it on things that you want.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is common just to miss the fact that the gain that you're getting out of immigration is not just that they have a job, but also, or that you have a job, but that your money actually buys more.
All right, so in the free market world, that's, I understand that argument. I've been arguing that for a while, unsuccessfully, may I say. I'm fighting a losing battle in Australia. But there is another side to the argument, which is around the public services and putting aside whether these things should exist or not, things like infrastructure, transport and hospitals, but also housing supply. One of the big driving factors of people's discontent in Australia is the fact that housing has become ridiculously unaffordable. How would you respond as an economist to those criticisms of immigration?
Let's do housing first.
Yeah.
So I've got a new book on housing coming out on May 1st. It's called Bill, Baby Bill, The Science and Ethics of Housing.
Okay.
Here is the hard truth. The free market is totally able to build an enormous amount of very cheap housing if government will only let it, but government won't let it. It is the second most important industry in the world after food. If we looked at farmers like they were criminals, we could also be on the verge of starvation.
Yeah.
In the case of housing, we really do look at builders and developers as if they are criminals. It is very hard to get permission to build tall buildings, very difficult to get permission to build close buildings, very difficult to get permission to go and build on new land, very difficult to get permission to go and change an historical building. It is often you have to go and provide a ton of parking. The regulations piled on have massively increased the price of housing, and you can take a look at how housing markets used to work. In earlier periods, housing prices would go up, and then they would go back down, because when the price of housing goes up, the price exceeds the cost of production. And guess what business does? Whenever the price of the product exceeds the cost of production, they do more. However, now there is so much regulation that the price of housing in the United States has been driven to about double the cost of production. I think in Australia it's even worse. And then immigrants are a convenient scapegoat for a problem that is totally caused by government. On the more general point of what about immigrants using services, This is one where you've got to look at numbers, which almost no one on earth wants to do. Because the question, all right, so immigrants, they use government services, they also pay taxes. The sensible question is, what is the net effect?
Yeah.
If you're wondering what is the effect on native taxpayers, it is total taxes the person's ever going to pay minus the total cost of services they're ever going to use.
Yeah.
Australia, precisely because you have such a strongly selective system, this is going to be a country where not only is a non-issue, it is a negative issue because the immigrants that you're letting in are going to be higher earning than the rest of the population, which means they're paying more taxes. And in the kind of system we have, it means they will be definite net taxpayers. They are reducing the burden on the native population, not increasing it.
Look, I'm convinced, but I've already been convinced for 10 years.
Yeah.
Where do you think we're at in terms? I mean, immigration's just blown up. It's a huge issue in the US. It's a huge issue right now in Australia. It's a massive issue in the UK. A lot of the Western world, which, let's be honest, has been the net recipient of most immigration for the last number of decades.
Which is a good thing. The whole point of immigration is to move people from countries that are not very good to live in to one that is good to live in.
So where do you see this going? Are free marketeers like yourself going to win this debate, do you think? Or is this, there seems to be a bit of a right-wing reaction happening at the moment. Do you think they're going to get the upper hand?
My view is we are going to muddle through with roughly what we're doing now indefinitely.
Okay.
On the one hand, I don't think that people are going to listen to me and significantly liberalize anything. On the other end, I don't think that the other side is going to be able to permanently get big changes in the laws.
Yeah.
The most that will happen is in the United States where you get a different executive and then they do some different executive orders, which the day that they're out of office
Get
no
changed again.
longer matters. So right now in the U.S., it looks like probably what we'll do is oscillate between when Republicans are presidents, then there is harsh enforcement at the border, and when Democrats are president, then there is light enforcement at the border.
Yeah.
But neither side is going to get enough of an upper hand to actually change policy. And I think that's basically true for Western countries in general. Of course, that I think there's going to be some random variation. There always is.
Of course.
Some countries will liberalize a bit. Some are going to tighten up a bit. I mean, here's the ultimate truth, which is that to actually completely stop immigration requires draconian brutality, which looks terrible in the news, and politicians essentially want the result of draconian brutality, which is no illegal immigration, combined with never actually having to do it, and that is not possible.
Yeah.
Right? That is a general feature of a lot of policy, actually, is the government could crush something, but to crush it, they would have to look evil. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, we want it to be crushed, but we don't want to have to make it look evil. I mean, probably the best sign of this is there's a lot of European governments that effectively bribe horrible North African dictatorships to run their immigration enforcement for them.
Yeah.
So it's like Spain, and Italy. We haven't done anything. It's the Libyans that did it because we gave them a pile of money to go and do terrible things, which we wanted to happen, but we didn't want to get our hands dirty. So that's, I think, the most typical result.
Yeah.
I answer your question honestly. So so there's what you hope and there's what you think, and those are different things.
Yeah. Well, Bryan Caplan, it's always a pleasure to meet new people. You're someone I've wanted to chat with for a very long time.
All right, fantastic.
Thank you for saying hi.
Thank you.
Well, we're here once again at the Students for Liberty conference in Washington, D.C. One of the things that I absolutely love about events like this is it brings together people that have similar values and similar objectives, but oftentimes outside of that particular area, they have wide areas of disagreement. And what that does is it widens your horizon and it helps you to see things and consider things that, well, me personally, I wouldn't have before. And one such example of that is Elizabeth Halliday. And thank you so much for having a chat with us here on the Aussie Wire. Now, Elizabeth,
thank you for having me.
You were instrumental in a little sort of pre-conference session that I sat in on, thoroughly enjoyed, had my brain sort of expanded and tugged on in different ways, which I always love. Can you tell us a little bit about what was your session about and how have you come to the point where this is something you're really passionate about and you're pursuing?
Topher, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here, happy to be part of Students for Liberty. We hosted a workshop on free market climate policy. It's a new approach to dealing with the energy transition. We're not in favor of command and control tactics. We support low taxes, free trade, competition. These types of things tend to underpin a lot of our policies. So we had 3 separate sessions. One was about nuclear and the regulations that prevent that from coming into market. We had one on free trade and low taxation, run by our fellow from the UK, who's originally from Australia, and one on private use of natural resources, run by someone from Bolivia, and they have all kinds of problems down there We want to find a free market approach on how to deal with the energy transition. Meanwhile, China is running the table, and we don't want to be in their pocket going forward.
Now, I have to apologize for all the background noise. There's not much we can do about that. There is a session in progress right now, and if I didn't just grab people like Elizabeth whenever I had the chance, then unfortunately she's so popular, she's so busy, I wouldn't get to chat with her at all. So I do apologize, but it's just how it is. It's how it has to be. One of the things that I loved is that I was able to sit down in that session, put aside my own personal opinions on CO2 and climate change and what have you. That's well known to my audience. It's not really relevant, because what's relevant is that you are looking for creative ways that are pro-freedom and pro-market to solve problems that a lot of people would categorize as, well, this is why we need government. We have to have government. This is a prime example of that. So can you tell me a little bit about how free markets and freedom and capitalism could have any kind of a beneficial impact on something like climate change?
Well, one of the things which I'm sure many people in your audience would know is that allowing businesses to prosper and trade is how the country recognizes prosperity. Millet made a beautiful point about that in his speech at Davos and really shook a lot of people up. So let's say for gas, those who would vote for end fossil now really have no plan on how to keep the world functioning. So what are we going to do if we need carbon capture, utilization, and storage? How are we going to do that? Not everybody has trillions of dollars lying around. They need to raise money. They raise money through the financial markets. What are the tools that exist that can help do that? One of our primary examples is called a clean asset bond or a co-victory bond, which is corporate tax-exempt debt. People can have a tax holiday on the interest and dividend payments that they would have to make. That would lower the cost of capital and therefore lower all of these projects. I live in New York City. We're watching offshore wind projects get canceled. We're watching companies that have promising futures. They can't make it because they can't make the interest payment. The cost curve is front loaded. It's like this, your costs, and then it levels off almost immediately. We need to address these upfront costs, and our private tax-exempt debt is one way to do it.
I need to dig a bit deeper into that. And again, I'm putting aside my own personal opinions on all of this, but I find it fascinating that we're looking for these sorts of mechanisms. But there must be something different in the American tax system or in the tax systems that you work with. In Australia, as I understand it, if you're a business and you've borrowed capital and you're paying interest on those borrowings, that is tax deductible. Your interest payments come from pre-tax income. So when we talk about a tax-free debt, what are we talking about? I'm not sure that I fully understand that.
That would be for the investors. That would be that the investors would not have to pay taxes.
That penny drop, yes, that makes perfect sense.
This would stabilize, it's a stabilizing factor for the fixed income market.
Right.
Let's say an equity, if you have an equity bond or even a capital gains tax, that comes in at about 30%. When you have an asset, it grows, you sell it.
Yeah.
A bond, you have a predictable coupon, it's going to pay 4%. Our program would last, what we've proposed, would last for 6 years.
Yeah.
A portion of the debt could be raised tax exempt, meaning these people get a holiday, but that would create a market. It would make people want to invest because they would know we're going to get 4% tax free for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
I can finance my wind farm. I can finance my carbon capture and storage, even if you're a real estate developer. Everybody thinks that their landlord charges too much, but even those guys don't have trillions of dollars to remake every building with solar-powered windows.
6-star energy efficiency ratings as we would have in
Well,
Australia.
we're a big fan of Energy Star ratings, but you can't do it for free.
Sure.
And expecting everybody to cough up all that money with no pathway to profitability when they can make their money back, it's just not happening. So we have money on the sidelines wanting to move forward, and the only thing we have now is gigantic subsidies.
Yeah.
We think that is where the imbalance begins, because we have a desire and we have cash, but we just need to find the right way to do it. And we think that we have a method by lowering the cost of capital on eligible projects, we'd be able to move forward. And if we really take this one step forward, we can apply this even more broadly in the market and watch what happens. You could generate a lot more business. You get things rolling. People have money in their pocket.
Sure.
They have an investment. It makes them buy into the project that they're working on. So we think this is a promising area of further research. Nothing is set in stone yet. That's why we're here today hosting workshops, and we're happy people like you are able to join us.
And that's why I was actually excited to join, despite disagreeing on some pretty fundamental things. It's not about that. It's about the fact that if this mechanism can work for this problem, then I think you may very well have discovered something that can then be applied much more broadly and potentially bring a free market philosophy into areas that would previously have been regarded as 100% government required to fix these problems. So, look, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time today before the conference started, your time right now on camera. I hope you go well, and I look forward to seeing your progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All the
Have a
best.
great day.
Well, you meet all kinds of people at a place like the Students for Liberty Annual Conference in Washington, D.C., including fellow Australians, although I will say, Stefan, you've kind of been running away. Stefan Livera of the Stefan Livera podcast, thank you so much for saying hi.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
What brings you here, besides to speak? Don't just say, oh, to speak. What's the why? Why are you here to speak?
I want to spread the word of Bitcoin, the word of liberty. I think we have a cultural battle to fight, let's say. And I think a good example is Javier Milei. Like, if you look at what happened with what he did, he got to the stage and look, he had certain ways of being eccentric and being very noteworthy. But he was able to fight this cultural battle, and we now have a explicitly anarcho-capitalist, government head of state, head of government,
Look,
right?
you've gone straight to a topic close to my heart. We've been following that as it's unfolded. We've had people who are Argentinian expats, and then actually soon we're going to be having an interview with an Argentinian government minister. That's a spoiler, don't tell anybody. But that's coming up soon on the Aussie Wire. Now, for someone like Javier Milei, a few years ago, the idea that he could successfully become president would have been mocked and laughed at. Why do you think the impossible happened in his case?
I'm going to say the pace of change is increasing.
Right.
If you look now, obviously you and I know very well the hysteria that happened in Australia and around the world
A
few years ago. And that was obviously a very bad change from a liberty perspective. No one's going to argue there. But I would also say that the pace of change seems to have picked up so quickly.
Yeah.
Right? There's all this different technology and innovation, and okay, people talking about whatever, AI, maybe AI is overhyped or whatever. But the point is, the pace of change is so rapid now that maybe there is now an opening for people like Javier Milei and for other libertarians around the world to do what he did. And so that kind of gives me some hope that people have had it, and people are starting to realize, not many of them, people are starting to realize how much the state is stealing from them with inflation. They're starting to realize the point of Bitcoin. You've got all these well-known big billionaire investors and people who are talking about Bitcoin, people like Bill Miller and others out there from the, not necessarily libertarians. These are investor people, and they're looking at Bitcoin being like, hey, I see the reason for this thing. So I think that is what gives me some hope. And that's also why, obviously, I want to be at some of these libertarian events, obviously to help promote Bitcoin and help libertarians understand that Bitcoin is a key tool in our overall fight here. And if you're not using Bitcoin, it's the equivalent of you're in the boxing ring with one arm behind your back. Like, we need to have, every tool at our disposal here.
Well, if you haven't figured it out yet, viewers, Bitcoin's a bit of a topic for Stefan. It's kind of his thing. Now, I do want to ask you, though, because some people get a little bit confused and I have some sympathy for the confusion, to be honest, because on the one hand, people like me say central bank digital currency bad, Bitcoin good. What's the difference? Why can both of those things be true at the same time?
Well, CBDC, central bank digital currency, is really like a bastardization. It's kind of like, a few years ago, you had these business leaders who would say, oh, poo-poo Bitcoin, blockchain is the real innovation. And so what we've seen is they're trying to be relevant in a certain way. And so it's kind of opened up this conversation around, oh, well, are you as private as you could be? Are you using the best money that you could? And so I think that's why we're seeing such a big conversation about CBDCs. Now, a lot of that is research or pilots. It's not necessarily launched, although in certain countries it has launched. I will note that in Nigeria it was launched and failed. So that's a great example from a liberty perspective. Although, who knows? It can come in other countries.
Cool.
Anyway, to bring it back to your point, though, to your question, how are they different?
Yeah.
Bitcoin is not centrally controlled. There is no central leader, CEO, office, server, country in which it's based. It's all around the world. There is no controller of Bitcoin. Whereas with central bank digital currencies, it's literally your money is just on tap for the government. They can create more of it. They can control it. They can put all kinds of conditions on it, on how you spend your CBDC coins. They may say, hey, Topher, you've been drinking too much, or you've been doing...
A common problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
I could imagine that.
right?
Yeah.
They could shut you off.
Yeah.
And that can be very important in the case of political disagreement, because people can then say, oh, Topher, you're speaking out against the regime. You're speaking in favor of liberty. We don't like that. We're going to shut you out.
Well, it's a great point, because we saw during in Canada during the lockdowns, of course, in Canada they had it, not quite as bad as we did in Melbourne, but certainly as bad as other parts of Australia. We saw the trucker convoy come together. We saw people donating to try and help them cover their costs and bills so that they could keep the pressure on. And then the Trudeau government stepped in and said, well, if you've donated, we're going to start shutting down your bank accounts. And Stefan, help me remember, what was it that people turned to be able to still make transactions at that time?
It was Bitcoin. And so there was Bitcoin fundraising used. And so that was what enabled a lot of the truckers to receive these funds. And so I think it helped the protests occur. And that protest in turn helped turn the tide in terms of the common view about lockdowns. Because soon after that, here's the dirty little secret, right? The powers that be don't want you to admit that protests can work.
Oh, yeah.
But guess what? They really can if there's a loud enough voice.
Yeah.
If the people speak out.
Yeah.
And if people take action, importantly,
Yeah.
they can move things and they can turn things around. And so I think it did happen in that case. And now I can't remember the exact detail, but there was a court that came out and said what they did was their use of emergency powers was illegal
Correct.
in Canada.
Correct.
So,
and in fact, the powers that he had in place got struck down. So Trudeau was quite clever in backing off when he did, and then removing the emergency declaration when he did, because it was inevitable that it was going to get struck down. And he kind of got out of dodge just in advance. But to your point, protests can definitely work, but we have to have the tools of the trade that allow us to live, allow us to transact, allow us to have lives as we go through that process. Coming to the conference here, we've got over 1,000 young people coming from up to 50 different countries are going to be here. What does this say to you about the future of liberty, these ideas? We talked about Javier Milei and the fact that he just spent so much time just preaching these ideas and getting them out there. What does this sort of an event say to you about the future of liberty, libertarianism specifically, but liberty as a concept?
well, I think it's growing. And I think really a lot of people have been screwed over by the state, various states around the world.
Yeah.
And so now they're interested in these ideas that obviously guys like you and I, we've been talking about libertarianism for how many decades now, right?
Yeah.
But we're now starting to see a lot more people come in and start to actually take the ideas seriously, right?
Yeah.
And I think you might have, we as libertarians might have seen, let's say, the libertarian movement in Brazil grow, and now the libertarian movement in Argentina grow.
Oh, yeah.
And so all around the world, we're starting to see this. So I think it's a great thing that more people are coming to these events where we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about liberty, we're talking about ways to do it in practice. It's not just this academic idea. It's now getting to the point of there are more people actually taking action.
It's a great point. There's a simple reality of life. People don't care about politics until it hurts them. And I saw this in Venezuela, obviously a country that's been devastated by bad politics. That was where I had my wake-up call, because I was a bit ambivalent towards Bitcoin until I went there and I met people who were living their entire lives in Bitcoin. They were earning their money in Bitcoin and they were paying their bills in Bitcoin. Why? Because it was hard money that wasn't inflating the way that the Bolivar was at the time. And so it took that kind of real life lesson to make me go, hang on, you're missing something here. There's something about this Bitcoin thing that you've missed. And the silver lining, not that I would wish it on anyone, but the silver lining out of COVID is that it hurt a lot of people. And there's a lot of people now beginning to get active and beginning to think a lot more and beginning to do a lot more. From your perspective, there's a lot of people out there who, like me, I have a Bitcoin wallet. I've got, a couple of dollars worth of Bitcoin in it. I don't routinely use it and transact with it. There's a lot of people like me, and there's a lot of people that have never even gone to the step of even creating that wallet in the first place. Where's the best place for people to go to get that real beginner kind of grounding?
Well, so I work at Swan, and recently we made a free Welcome to Bitcoin course.
This was not planned, by the way. I was not aware of what his answer was going to be.
So swan.com/welcome.
Okay.
And it's a free 1-hour course. I helped write some of the scripting for this myself.
Brilliant.
Delivered by Natalie Brunell, who's a well-known Bitcoin educator, podcaster herself. And so this is actually a free course. People can learn about Bitcoin. I think not everybody is going to be using it day to day, and that's okay.
Sure.
But just start by saving it with it a little bit, right? Even if it's like 1 to 5% of what you would, invest with or save with. And what you'll find over time is as you learn, you sort of go further down that rabbit hole and you start to see the possibility, the potential of what this could really do. Because if you're a libertarian, if you believe in liberty, you want the size of the state to be smaller. You want less taxes, less regulation, smaller state.
Yeah.
And this is really the way that we, the common people, can actually force that issue. Because voting in the ballot box, sometimes it can help, but really, I've heard it described, I believe it was Stefan L who said, voting is like a suggestion box for slaves. It's just kind of like, we're just kind of putting this...
He was a good cynic, Stefan Molyneux. He knew how to word a good cynical observation.
And so I think Bitcoin will force that issue because it will make the state actually have to compete for your taxation revenue as opposed to just borrowing with cheap fiat credit. So that's the big difference.
Well, it's a fascinating thing because it introduces this idea of currency competition, which is something that is foreign to most people's even concept of how a country could be. But we're going to have to come back to that topic at another time. We are out of time. But Stefan, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Great to chat.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Aussie Wire News. We've had more coverage today from inside the Students for Liberty conference here at Washington, D.C. The first thing I did when I got to Washington was I grabbed my hoodie that says too much 1984, not enough 1776, and I got a photo of it. I'll make sure that goes up on the screen now so you can appreciate that. It was just my little way of saying hello to America. I'm a foreigner and I'm going to tell you exactly what's wrong with your country. Well, anyway. Look, if you've enjoyed today's episode, you can catch up on the episode from Tuesday where we had other interviews from inside the same conference. You can catch up with that on our website, theaussiewire.com. Follow us on all our socials. That's at The Aussie Wire on all of the platforms. And please consider becoming an insider. That's a financial supporter. You'll find the link for that in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Topher, and this is The Aussie Wire.